ಇಷ್ಟು ದಿನವೂ ಮಾಡಿ ಭ್ರಷ್ಟನಾಗಿ ಹೋದೆನೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಜನರ ಸಂಗ ಇಷ್ಟು ದಿನವೂ ಮಾಡಿ ಭ್ರಷ್ಟನಾಗಿ ಹೋದೆನೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಬೆಟ್ಟದೊಡೆಯನೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಮುಟ್ಟಿ ಭಜಿಸುವ ಭಾಗ್ಯ. ಬೆಟ್ಟದೊಡೆಯನೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಮುಟ್ಟಿ ಭಜಿಸುವ ಭಾಗ್ಯ. ಇಷ್ಟಗಳ ಎನಗೆ ಕೊಡಿಸೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಭಕ್ತ ಜನ ಪಾಲಕ ಭಕ್ತಿ ಸುಖದಾಯಕ ಮುಕ್ತೇಶ ದೀನಬಂಧೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಆನಂದ ತೀರ್ಥ ಮುನಿಯ ಧ್ಯಾನಿಪರ ಸಂಗವನು ಆನಂದದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಆನಂದ ತೀರ್ಥ ಮುನಿಯ ಧ್ಯಾನಿಪರ ಸಂಗವನು ಆನಂದದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ದೀನ ಜನ ಮಂದಾರ ನೀನೆಂದು ನಂಬಿದೆನೋ. ದೀನ ಜನ ಮಂದಾರ ನೀನೆಂದು ನಂಬಿದೆನೋ. ಸಾನುರಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಯೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಭಕ್ತ ಜನ ಪಾಲಕ ಭಕ್ತಿ ಸುಖದಾಯಕ ಮುಕ್ತೇಶ ದೀನಬಂಧೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಅಜಜನಕ ಗಜವರದ ಭುಜಗಶಯನನೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಭಜಿಪ ಭಾಗ್ಯವನೇ ಕೊಡಿಸೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಅಜಜನಕ ಗಜವರದ ಭುಜಗಶಯನನೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಭಜಿಪ ಭಾಗ್ಯವನೇ ಕೊಡಿಸೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಹೊರತು ಸಲಹುವರನ ಕಾಣೆ. ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಹೊರತು ಸಲಹುವರನ ಕಾಣೆ. ವಿಜಯ ವಿಠಲರೇಯನೇ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಭಕ್ತ ಜನ ಪಾಲಕ ಭಕ್ತಿ ಸುಖದಾಯಕ ಮುಕ್ತೇಶ ದೀನಬಂಧೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಯುಕ್ತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿನ್ನಂಥ ದೇವರನು ನಾ ಕಾಣೆ. ಯುಕ್ತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿನ್ನಂಥ ದೇವರನು ನಾ ಕಾಣೆ. ಸತ್ಯವತಿ ಸುತನೆ ಕಾಯೋ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಕೃಷ್ಣ. ಆನಂದ 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 ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಆನಂದನ ಕಂದನು ಒಲಿಯೇ ಏನಂದದ್ದೇ 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 ವೇದ ವೃಂದ. ಆನಂದ 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 ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಆನಂದನ ಕಂದನು ಒಲಿಯೇ ಏನಂದದ್ದೇ ಏನಂದದ್ದೇ ವೇದ ವೃಂದ ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಆ ಮೊದಲು ಕ್ಷಾಕಾರಾಂತ ಈ ಮಹಾವರ್ಣಗಳೆಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಮೊದಲು ಕ್ಷಾಕಾರಾಂತ ಈ ಮಹಾವರ್ಣಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಸ್ವಾಮಿಯಾದ ವಿಷ್ಣುವಿನ ನಾಮವೆಂದು ತಿಳಿದವರಿಗೆ ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಪೋಪುದು ಬರುತ್ತಿಪ್ಪುದು ಕೋಪ ಶಾಂತಿ ಮಾಡುವುದು, ಪೋಪುದು ಬರುತ್ತಿಪ್ಪುದು ಕೋಪ ಶಾಂತಿ ಮಾಡುವುದು, ರೂಪಲಾವಣ್ಯವು ಹರಿ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರವೆಂದರಿತವರಿಗೆ ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಜಲ ಕಾಷ್ಟ ಶೈಲ ಗಗನ ನೆಲಪಾವಕ ವಾಯುತರು, ಜಲ ಕಾಷ್ಟ ಶೈಲ ಗಗನ ನೆಲಪಾವಕ ವಾಯುತರು, ಫಲ ಪುಷ್ಪ ಬಳ್ಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹರಿ ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ವ್ಯಾಪ್ತಾನಿಂದವರಿಗೆ ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ತಾರೋ ಬಾರೋ ಬೀರೋ ಸಾರೋ ಮಾರು ತೋರೋ ಹಾರೋ ಹೋರೋ, ತಾರು ಬಾರೋ ಬೀರೋ ಸಾರೋ ಮಾರು ತೋರೋ ಹಾರೋ ಹೀರೋ, ಸೇರು ತೋರೋದೆಂಬುದೀಶ ಪ್ರೇರಣೆಯೆಂದು ಅರಿತವರಿಗೆ ಆನಂದ ಆನಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಮಧ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಪ್ರವಚನ ಮಧ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಪ್ರವಚನ ಮುದ್ದು ಕೃಷ್ಣನ ದರುಶನ, ಮಧ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಪ್ರವಚನ ಮುದ್ದು ಕೃಷ್ಣನ ದರುಶನ, ಸಿದ್ಧ ವಿಜಯ ವಿಠಲನ್ನ ಸಿದ್ಧ ವಿಜಯ ವಿಠಲನ್ನ ಸಿದ್ಧ ವಿಜಯ ವಿಠಲನ್ನ ಪೊಂದಿಕೊಂಡಾಡುವರಿಗೆ ಆನಂದ 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 ಮತ್ತೆ ಪರಮಾನಂದ. ಆನಂದ ಕಂದನು ಒಲೆಯೇ ಏನಂದದ್ದೇ ಏನಂದದ್ದೇ ವೇದ ವೃಂದ ಆನಂದ 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 ಆನಂದ. ಶ್ರೀ ಹರೀಶ್.
ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿತ್ತು.
We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Swamiji is on his way. Once he's here, we'll start off the afternoon session with Rabbi Brill giving us an overview. So, patience for a couple more minutes and we'll get started. Voice that hopefully should come across through all of you. We would welcome him here to come and speak and share some thoughts on Judaism, which he specializes in, as well as Christianity and Islam. So he's going to cover the whole spectrum. Let's give him a big hand.
There's a Jewish statement that says, "Who is wise? Someone who learns from everybody." So I am here to learn with you today. I want to learn from all of you, and therefore I thank all the organizers. I thank for being invited. I thank the guru, and I thank all of you for sitting here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Coming from the Jewish perspective, I'm going to be speaking more about karma and liberation and less on salvation. I assume everyone can hear me back there. Because salvation is not really a Jewish category. Jews primarily think about their duties, dharma and karma, and incidentally then there's the question of liberation. Liberation, especially if you're doing things and leading a correctly and leading a proper life. I think last year I was visiting in Queens, and I visited the Flushing Ganesha Temple. But afterwards, there's a very small little North Indian house mandir across the street. Okay, and I went in there. And the person who was taking care of it came up to me and says he likes Judaism because it believes that this world is good and there's a very clear path of what you have to do on a daily basis. That's what I'm going to talk about. But beyond that, when I was in Benares Hindu University, I taught Judaism in the university, among other things. I found that very few had much of a sense of Judaism. They would ask me basic questions like, are you still practicing the Bible? And I said, not exactly, we're not doing Leviticus. But they said, oh, you got rid of it in the 19th century. No, not exactly. We got rid of it more than 2,000 years ago. We're following the religion of the rabbis, the sages of the Talmud. And that's what I'm going to talk about. The first third today will be on some sort of introduction to Judaism and how Judaism is about Jewish law, the Talmud, the Halakha, and the other two-thirds on the topic of liberation. And unfortunately, I'm the only one here representing Judaism. I'm going to give you a little overview of half a dozen different Jewish philosophies. Jewish philosophy, Kabbalah, Hasidic, Jews and reincarnation, modernists like Rav Kook and the Reform movement, to give you some sense that there are multiple philosophies, the same way you have many darshana, there are multiple Jewish approaches, and that you should know about that. So to get started, Jews read the opening of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, and God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was good. End of story. Jews do not have a fall, no original sin, no need for salvation. It is just not the way Jews read the Bible or think about things. God created a good world, tasked you with what to do, and you do it. Beyond that, Jews are very specific about relationship of Jews to God, and Jews take later chapters from Genesis 12 on that God has a specific covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, and then took them out from Egypt from bondage with an outstretched arm and redeemed them, and therefore Jews have a special relationship with the God of the Bible. And beyond that, in Exodus 19 is a crucial passage for Judaism, that God brings the Jews to Mount Sinai and tells them, I took you out from Egypt, keeping my word to Abraham, and you will now be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, and you will keep my covenant. And for Jews, the covenant is the study of Torah, the sacred writings, the sacred path. That is the Jewish read. But the passage continues, making it more Jewish. And the Lord said to Moses, I come in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee. Meaning, That passage that God comes in a cloud, Jews do not make images or representation. They read the passages as if God remains always unknown, in a cloud, beyond us, and that's not the Jewish path. What the Jewish path is, jumping to Deuteronomy, now this is the commandment, the statutes, the ordinances which the Lord your God commanded to teach you. And you're going to keep the statutes and commandments, you, your children, children, all the days of their life. And Jews are going to focus on this word in Hebrew called mitzvah, a word that contains some part commandment, some part dharma, some part good deed. You are going to follow this path. And that's the basic line for understanding Judaism, the commandments. And it continues, you shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, his testimonies, his statutes, and you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord. And the famous Jewish prayer, that if people who know one Jewish prayer, it's the Shema, which literally means hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You should love the God with your heart, your soul, and all your might. And you should place these words in your heart, teach them to your children, and you shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk in your way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Okay, that is basic Judaism. Now I'm going to give you something, a little comparison to Christianity. Jews and Christians do not have the same order of the Bible. The books are arranged differently, they're broken up differently, and therefore the last book in the Jewish Bible is the book of Chronicles, with a promise that you're going to come back from exile, back to the land of Israel, and you are going to live a life under God, in which you will now work the land, and He will provide in prosperity, and you will be flourishing. And that is unlike the Christians who end the Bible with Malachi about Elijah pointing to Jesus. Jews don't ask questions about what is the prophecy pointing to, Jesus, redemption. It's about this world being God is going to take care of us here and now. Or something that comes up all the time if you don't know how to read a Bible, Jews and Christians translate the Bible differently. So when you look at the book of Isaiah, most quoted by Christians, when you have a verse, you are my witness, the Lord said, that I formed the world, and that there shall be no other besides me. Jews read that as a reference that God created the world and it was good. Christians tend to read Isaiah as you are giving witness to the coming of Jesus. There's going to be no overlap even in the same book. One is reading it pointing forward, and the other is reading it as pointing to how we live our lives. So I need that as a basis before we go on. Skipping ahead to now the major period of Judaism, the rabbinic period of the Talmud going from 200 BCE to 600 CE, the concept of commandment, mitzvah, is expanded into a whole idea of the oral tradition. Jews will separate between the revelation of the Bible and the ever-unfolding oral tradition. I know Hindus have a very similar distinction between the things that are given in Revelation and the unfolding tradition. Jews then say there's an unfolding tradition which becomes the halakha, the way you walk, the oral law. Eventually it creates two books, the Mishnah, which is an encapsulated law which is memorized and originally was chanted. It was memorized, and still, if you're 16 years old, there are contests to see how much you can memorize of it and chant it. And then the Talmud, which is thousands upon thousands of pages of commentary and direction. But the important idea, even though it doesn't actually work out, the Talmud says that Jews have 613 commandments. You know, there are many more. And that corresponds 365 negative commands corresponding to the solar year, and 248 positive commandments corresponding to the parts of the body. meaning all time and all bodies should be involved in serving God. There's even a Jewish tradition in which every school kid has tried that a pomegranate has 613 seeds, corresponding to the commandments given by God. And if you actually open one, it's usually between 610 and 620. But I mean, every school kid, when they're told that at 6 or 7, makes a point of, Mommy, Daddy, we need a pomegranate to check that out. But those are seen as the commandments that you do. Why do you do the commandments? The Talmud says the mitzvot are our source of merit. God wanted us to have merit, therefore he gave many mitzvot. God desired for the sake of righteousness to magnify the Torah and make it full of its glory. And even within these commandments, Maimonides, the great 12th century thinker, says it's appropriate that one meditate according to his intellectual capacity regarding the laws of the Torah to understand their deeper meanings. Those laws which he finds no reason and no purpose should not be treated lightly because you just may have not figured out the meaning. So there's a whole literature trying to figure out the meaning of these commandments, but be careful with it. Don't trust your own understandings, even though you provide them. And the commandments are divided into giving one of the rubrics 6 commands. 1, Torot, those are commands concerning God and humanity. Mishpatim, those are the ones about justice, court system, having a just society. Laws, chukim, that don't seem to have clear reasons, is the way we relate to plants, animals, and the inanimate order. Mitzvot, technical commands about loving all beings. Edut are historic testimonies about events and festivals. And finally, avoda, worship, which is prayer in our inner religious life. Moving ahead, the basic book, if anyone usually starts with Talmudic literature, is a 2nd century book called Chapters of the Fathers in English, Avot in Hebrew, which presents the idea that the Jewish tradition is a received oral tradition, generation to generation, and it's further developing. But at the same time, it's going to say a lot of what you would call karma questions of what is the role of what our actions are. And this is the basic for all Jews. So I'll read this as a setup. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, gave it to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the elders to the prophets. Prophets gave it to the men of the Great Assembly. And the men of the Great Assembly said 3 things. Be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a fence around the Torah. Simon the Righteous, the last surviving member of the Great Assembly, from the year 100 or so, would say the world stands on 3 things: Torah, service of God, and deeds of kindness. The third statement in this book already gets us to the topic of the day, automatic transition. Antigonus, the man of Sohos, received from Simon the Righteous, and he say, do not serve God as slaves who serve their master for the sake of reward. Rather be as slaves who serve their master not for the sake of reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. So the Jewish approach is you do these not because, even though there will be a reward, you don't do it. You do it as a complete service, selfless, not for a reward, not because you expect your fear of punishment, but you do it for its own sake as a selfless act. And I'll let others provide the parallels to the Bhagavad Gita. But that is the basic line that Jews think of. Not salvation, but you serve God for its own sake. Reward will come automatically. Yossi, the son of Yochanan of Jerusalem, received the tradition from them. He said, let your home be a meeting place for the wise. Sit in the soil of the feet of the wise, and drink thirstily of your words. Hillel and Shammai said, be a disciple of Aaron, a lover of peace, a pursuer of peace, and love the creatures and draw close to the Torah. And the one that's very famous here in America, gets posted everywhere. They would also say, if I am not for myself, who is for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? The second chapter starts off, what is the right path for you to choose? And it says, whatever is harmonious for the one who does it, and harmonious for the rest of mankind. But it continues, and this is back to our topic of today, be careful with minor mitzvot, with minor deeds as much as major ones, for you don't know the rewards of the commandments. Consider the cost of a mitzvah, a commandment against its rewards, and the rewards of a transgression against its cost. Meaning, don't do a calculus of what's important, what's less. Don't make all sorts of this we should do, this we shouldn't do. It's one thing, and it's not for you to calculate what of all the path of things we're supposed to do that one should do. And then he continues, same statement, contemplate three things, and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know what is above you, a seeing eye, a listening ear, and all your deeds being inscribed in a book. So as much as you don't place values and you serve God for his own sake, you understand that God sees everything, hears everything, and inscribes everything. Corresponding, make of it what you will, corresponding to a karmic idea. He also says, skipping to number 4, make God's will the same as your will, and you should make your will the same as God's will. Nullify your will before him, so that he should nullify the will of others before your will. There's an idea of identifying with God's will, and that that's what your duty is. And that the repayment is that God, if you're going to serve God and make your will his will, he will then follow your will. And one more on this statement. Rabbi Tarfon would say, it is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to absolve from it. Meaning, there is no end to duties, chores, religious life, what you're supposed to do. But you cannot absolve yourself from it, even though you know you're never going to finish the task, nor will anybody else. Okay? And it ends off, know that your employer, meaning God, is trustworthy to pay you the reward of your labors, and know that the reward of the righteous is in the world to come. That's for all Jews. Those are basic statements that God is trustworthy and you will get a reward. As I said before, these sort of basic statements are then explained in the Talmud, and the American edition of just one part of it goes on for 20 volumes. And then there are commentaries from the 11th, 12th century on it. The Talmud's in a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic. And that the Talmud will include disputed rulings, other opinions, logical principles, resolving contradictions, all of that creating many pages on every single verse. Okay. Now, to the philosophical part, I'm going to get started. Basic Talmudic anthropology for any discussion of karma or moksha would be God created man with two inclinations, one good and one evil, and you should serve God with both of them. And the Talmud says, if not for also having an evil inclination, no man would ever build a house, take a wife, or beget a family, or engage in work. Meaning, all of your human faculties, good and bad, should be used to serve God. There's an assumption here of a normal life, getting a job, getting married, building a home, and therefore you use everything in its service. The Talmud also says, in the world to come, there'll be no eating or drinking, nor business nor jealousy, but the righteous sit with crowns on their heads, feasting on the brightness of the Shekhinah, of God's dwelling. Not the question of salvation, but that you'll be feasting on God after you die. in the 12th century, that becomes summarized. The righteous and pious of all the nations will have a share in the world to come. That Jews do not need everyone to become Jewish. Everybody who is righteous and pious gets a share in the world to come. Because our theology goes back to that Genesis statement, the world is good, and therefore everyone is included. The first of the approaches of how to take this is Maimonides. Maimonides, living in the Islamic world, is very much based on rational philosophy. And he assumes that, and he writes this about Adam. The intellectual man distinguishes between true and false, which is what Adam originally possessed. However, when we live in the world, people gave way to their desires that had their source in the imagination and the gratification of body appetites. He therefore transgressed because he no longer followed reason, he followed desire and imagination. He lost his true state, and therefore the goal was to get back to the state to understand true and false. I mean, for Maimonides, the goal of liberation is to get back to the Garden of Eden, to overcome our false desires, our false imagination. When I taught this in Benares, right or wrong, they said this sounded rather yogic to them, in that you have to then train yourself to get beyond all the distractions, to get beyond everything that's going to take you away from true knowledge in order to get back to the knowledge of the one. And then he continues with a simile of a palace, in which the goal is to get to the center of the palace through your own training. But he says there are some people who don't even look to find the palace of the king. Some people go to the palace of the king but hold on to false doctrines, and they barely get into the gate. There are those who perfected some of their faculties, and they are at least in the inner court. There are those who've been trained philosophically and contemplatively, and they get within the inner gate. And only the true worshiper of God can actually get before the king, having attained the true knowledge of God. And a true knowledge can be attained if one seeks it to be in the presence of the king. That is a philosophic, Maimonidean, rational, contemplative approach. A second approach, closer to the Kabbalah, and I'm going to quote the Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism or Jewish visions of God, are much closer to what you think of as a tantric approach. This is the proper way if you want to do anything like recite a prayer, a blessing, or its opposite. You must visualize in your mind that you are light, and around you is light as a throne of light. Imagine the known order of lights all around you, and you contemplate the order of lights, ascending from below to above, the whole order of creation, until you reach the infinite and the divine. The Kabbalah is a contemplative path of lights, leading up into the infinite divine, and if you're going to achieve liberation, it's going to be through your contemplation of lights. An alternate approach is, instead of contemplating lights, you visualize the divine name, the Hebrew divine name, and you place it in your mind. There's a whole series of name visualizations, all for the same purpose of the spiritual purification to reach a liberation. Once again, it's not a salvation, it's a liberation for you to put yourself on a higher level. So the philosophic level is level one. This Kabbalistic level actually gives you meditations. And therefore the goal is to enter the world of souls, to see the light, and any sort of texts that talk about punishment for the wicked are interpreted by the Kabbalah as a spiritual abyss versus a spiritual liberation. Because you're lost in this world, and that don't take that there's literally a place as heaven and hell, but these are spiritual states. So much so that the 17th century Kabbalists from Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in Italy, said all discussions of liberation in the world to come are only what we can imagine. There's nothing that we really know. It's only our imaginings of people who've experienced it or people who've been there. But it's actually, until we get there, we don't really know the details. Jews have always had this certain philosophic self-reflection, saying, understand that this is all a metaphor. Beyond that, the 16th century Sapphic Kabbalist, Rav Moses Cordovero, is going to want a realization that God is in all things. And Judaism will always remain dualistic. It's never going to become a complete oneness, even when it sounds oneness. So Moses Cordovero will write, as a contemplative path, the essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them, and existence exists in every existent. If you suppose that the infinite divine emanates only until a certain point, and from that point on, God is outside of it, you have taken God away from the world, God forbid. Rather, understand that the infinite God is in every existent. Do not say this stone is not God, God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone, even the stone, is a thing pervaded by divinity. But the one thing that defines Judaism, unlike Hinduism, is that no Jew will ever then actually worship the stone, use the stone in worship, put a face on it, or actually use it in any specific way as a representation. So there's an idea of realization that God is in all things, but at no point you actually visualize it as a form of worship. And it continues, God is in everything that exists, though everything that it is present in everything, everything comes into being, nothing is devoid of his divinity. And divinity flows and adheres in everything that exists. This is the meaning of the verse of the Bible. God's presence fills the whole world. Contemplate this. It will humble your soul and your thoughts will be purified. So the path of liberation is to contemplate how God is in all things. That's how you will purify yourself. Another model would be the Hasidic approach. Hasidic movement was a Jewish revival movement in the 18th, 19th century in Eastern Europe. That's much more enthusiastic, much more inflamed, much more prayer and dance oriented, much more what you might call bhakti than actually sitting there reading the book. And so therefore they will describe prayer. The purpose of all prayer is to uplift the words, to return them to their infinite source above. The world was created by the downward flow of letters. The task of man is to form those letters into words and take them back to God. If you come to know this dual process of the divine coming down and you're having to return it, your prayer will be joined to the constant flow of divine creation. As God turns to look at the ascending word, life flows through all the worlds and prayer receives its answer. All this happens in an instant, and all this happens continuously. Time has no meaning in the sight of God. The divine spring is ever flowing. One who is ready can make himself into a channel to receive the waters above. So unlike the Kabbalist who wants you to contemplate it, think about it, read 100 books, spend 20 years contemplating it, the Hasidic approach is start praying, and when you see yourself immediately in this vitality, you experience the divine in all things. Moving ahead, something that may not be known anymore is Jews and reincarnation. Now, Jews and reincarnation actually goes back. Josephus assumes that Jews believe in reincarnation. Vivekananda speaks about, quotes passages actually from Josephus, that Jews believe in reincarnation. And Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, who was the rabbi for the East India Company, meaning when the Dutch and the British were exploring India, used to read the books that used to come back from India. And he says the belief in reincarnation is a firm belief for our entire congregation of Jews. and none are to be found disputing it. Reincarnation is a true belief and one of the fundamental principles of Torah, and it solves the problem of why a righteous person suffers. And this is an important point, that pre-modern Jews believed in reincarnation, and one should not, the certain point is that it's a big part of Judaism, and as much as a certain amount of missionaries made it a big dividing point between Christians and Hindus, it didn't have the same dividing point between Jews and Hindus. In fact, so much of the same Menachem in Israel, actually when he used to read the books from missionaries who would describe the religion of India, would write back, I don't understand what you're saying, because God gave everybody a religion, and anybody who calls in the name of God or offers to God is worshiping the true God. So there's a Christian-Jewish divide here on that account. But in terms of the afterlife, reincarnation, until about the 18th century, Jews assumed that everybody had to be reborn at least 2 or 3 times. All the standard books of Jewish law assume that everyone is going to be reincarnated. In the 16th century, this becomes even more so, in which Rabbi Chaim Vital, a student of Rabbi Isaac Luria, wrote, as long as a person has not achieved their full purpose of everything they have to rectify in this world, the Holy One, blessed be He, replants them over and over again. Behold, after a person's death, he is repaid for his sins and purified, and then he can be reincarnated as mineral, vegetable, animal, or person. Okay, that was a 16th, 17th, 18th century Jewish view. And it went back and forth, a more mild 2 or 3 times, because you still have to work on yourself with this continuous, endless path of many, many reincarnations. But what's really interesting here, and to understand the trajectory of Jewish life, Jews pushed reincarnation almost entirely away in the 19th century. When Jews modernized, besides doing away with folk medicine and all sorts of things to ward off the evil eye, they also did away with the idea of reincarnation. So you will not find almost any 20th century, end of 20th or beginning of 21st century Jew who still believes in reincarnation, because it was pushed aside in the 19th century. As you know, also in Hinduism, there were many changes in the 19th century. This is one of the things that the Jewish modernity took out, the reincarnation. However, I can find you 2,000 years before that of Jews having reincarnation. Moving to the 20th century, I'm going to deal with the first Orthodox chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, who's going to apply liberation to this world's building, to the creation of this world and making this world an evolving, better place. There's already half a shelf of books and articles comparing Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook to Aurobindo that are already able to be read. And Rav Kook writes, the theory of evolution is increasingly conquering the world at this time. He's writing in the 1920s. And more so than all other philosophic theories, this conforms to the Kabbalistic secrets of the world. Evolution, which proceeds on a path of ascendancy, provides an optimistic foundation for the world. How is it possible to despair at a time when we see everything evolves and ascends? When we penetrate the inner life of ascending evolution, we find that a divine element shining with absolute brilliance. It is precisely because the infinite divine, the Ein Sof, manages to bring into realization what was already in the divine and potential. And he continues as this optimistic evolutionary religion. Religious wisdom ranks higher than all the other sciences in this. Religious wisdom transforms the will and the spiritual attributes of its learners, drawing them to the supernal heights on which its concern is focused. All secular sciences lack this capacity of drawing people to wisdom, because they cannot by themselves engender anything new, which in this case is the evolution of human consciousness. Okay? He's writing this in the 1920s. Now as I draw closer to the end of my talk, in the 20th century, American Jews divide up into many denominations. If you are Reformed, you've taken away much of the ritual, many of the ideas, because you now say we're modern and we need reforms. If you're Orthodox, I am an Orthodox rabbi, you're still keeping the traditional laws, the traditional dietary laws, the traditional purity laws, but you've modernized them, updated them, put them in more intellectual and scientific terms, when still making greater use of the traditional texts. A text that I'm going to end off, one of the final texts, this is from a Reform congregation. This was on their website about what do they think about afterlife and liberation now in the 21st century as Reform, liberal Jews who don't keep much of the ritual anymore. One, we still believe there's an afterlife where people go after they die. Two, heaven is an open door policy. Heaven is not a gated community. The righteous of any people in every faith have their place in it. And it's our actions which determine our faith. Three, for modern Jews, the afterlife can take many forms, and the Jewish forms of the afterlife are as diverse as Jews themselves. For some, it's a resurrected body. For some of them, it's a vision of life. And for other of them, it's living on through the sense of their grandchildren. Four, the afterlife is already here on earth, in which you then can reunite with the divine while you're still living. This is from a Reform perspective. And finally, number five, the Jewish prayer book expresses the idea through the metaphor of a leaf in a tree. A leaf drops to the ground, but it nourishes the soil, so more plants and trees spring up. The same is true of our lives. We nourish the future through the influence we have on those who follow us. It can happen in unimaginable ways. I'm going to conclude in a minute, but if anyone has any questions later or tomorrow, I am open or online. You can reach me. So in conclusion, for the Jewish view of the afterlife, about why it's not salvation, but it is following karma and liberation, the Jewish sage Rabbi Menachem Meiri wrote, "The world to come is not a reward for one's actions, but rather their fruit. In other words, good actions are produced like fruit from a tree automatically."
Namaste. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.